So good morning and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison. And as the title of this podcast suggests, it has a very broad remit covering the evolving challenges associated with generating trust and influencing buyers in all areas of B2B. Now, these are tough challenges, but they take on a new urgency and resonance in what's a rapidly evolving landscape. Episodes are released weekly. Please don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to rate the episode or podcast. We'd love to get your feedback and love to have you on board to listen to future episodes. So, in today's episode, we're exploring what it takes for Western B2B companies to successfully market themselves in Japan and South Korea, two of Asia's most developed and yet distinctly different economies. Trust operates differently in these markets, each one distinctively. In Japan, the world's fourth largest economy, over 4 trillion GDP dollars, business culture values stability, long-term relationships, and meticulous attention to details. Buyers expect partners to understand these principles and who demonstrate patience in building credibility. Meanwhile, South Korea has a $1.8 trillion economy and over 90% e-commerce adoption moves faster, rewards innovation, and yet remains deeply traditional in terms of how business relationships are formed. Too many Western companies arrive treating Asia as a single market, bucketing Japan, Korea, China, and others together, and wonder why their marketing fails to gain traction. The reality is these markets require fundamentally different approaches to channels, messages, and relationship building. And today, I'm talking to Robert Heldt, who's CEO of AIM Worldwide. Robert has spent 17 years helping Western B2B brands navigate the Japanese market and is now expanding into South Korea with a new office opening early next year. He's perfectly placed to explain the nuances that make or break a market entry process. In this session, you'll learn why treating Japan and Korea as similar markets is a costly mistake and what makes each unique, how buyer behavior and trust dynamic differ from Western markets and how that should inform your channel and insight strategy, and practical guidance for companies entering these markets for the first time or who are looking to be more successful there. So that's what we're going to talk about. Robert, how are you doing? Great to see you today.
Thank you, Joel. I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Really a big fan of your trust and relationship podcast. So yes, great to be here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. We're looking forward to tucking into this. And I have a personal, as you and I discussed, I've got a personal interest in this. My wife spent 2 years in Japan, and so I kind of feel there are a lot of Japanese cultural influences in our house. So I'm looking forward to understanding the B2B aspect of that, which I think could be a fascinating conversation.
Sure.
I've summarized, your kind of role. Tell us a bit more about yourself and about AIM Worldwide and what you do and how you came to be specializing in this particular niche of helping Western companies in Japan, first of all, and then increasingly more so Korea.
Yeah, I'm originally from India, Chennai, in the southeast coast of India, and I've been in Japan 21 years now. I actually started my career in the hospitality background and industry, working in the Maldives, and I met my wife over there and moved to Japan in 2004. So I never really imagined I would end up working with global B2B brands and helping them enter or expand in Japan or Korea for that matter. But when I moved to Japan, I was really fascinated by the advertising scene over here, where the weird, the wild, and the wonderful all kind of blended in this amazing country. And so I was really fascinated and started looking at opportunities in the advertising industry, and then switched to advertising, doing advertising sales for magazines, print magazines back in the day, and then started working with marketers and senior decision makers. And very early on, I really saw how sophisticated and relationship-driven these markets are. And quite frankly, they're misunderstood from outside. That's why I co-founded Custom Media as a B2B print publishing company back in the day, in good old days of print. And from that, we transitioned and evolved into a print to digital advertising agency. And today, we are more B2B marketing and PR focused. And Custom Media still exists as a company, but we've launched AIM B2B, which is the dedicated agency focused on helping Western B2B companies to navigate complex markets in APAC like Japan and Korea, and working with clients across technology, SaaS, manufacturing, clean energy, consulting. We support companies through everything from localization to GTM strategies. And what really keeps me energized in these both markets are that they continue to transform both culturally, digitally, as well as economically. And there's always something new to learn. So yeah, that's kind of what got me into this wonderful world of B2B.
It's fascinating. Is this, as you say, lots of different cultural inputs there going on. So really exciting. And you and I from a similar background. If you're watching this video, you can see I've recently just put up some back issues of our magazine, B2B Marketing, which sadly stopped printing about 3 years ago, but I miss those days. There was something great about having a physical printed product, but equally we live in this very dynamic world now. We've got to respond to it, haven't we, both you and I?
Indeed, yeah.
So we talked earlier on about Japan being the world's fourth largest economy, $4 trillion GDP, while South Korea is about half that size, 1.8 trillion, both with GDP per capita above $34,000. So both sizable markets and very significant on the world stage. For Western B2B companies considering expansion, how would you characterize the nature of these opportunities? Are they complementary markets? Are they very distinct propositions?
Yeah, if you just look at the opportunity itself, Japan and Korea should be right on the top of the priority list for Western companies that are looking towards East, right? They, as you pointed out, together they represent about $6 trillion of GDP, are consistently, among the most R&D intensive countries in the world. Japan invests about 3.4% of its GDP every year in R&D. Korea is close to 5%. Both markets have really exceptional, IP and regulatory stability. Japan is very process-driven, meticulous enforcement, while as Korea has a dynamic, innovation-focused, IP environment, stricter penalties. So the opportunity is really real, but it's not just the size, it's the maturity. Both these markets are pretty advanced enterprise economies where buyers deeply value quality, reliability, and long-term partnerships. They're both, complementary but distinct in and of itself. Japan is, very stable, predictable, kind of more relationship-first focus and more methodical in how they adopt digital strategies. Whereas Korea is like a fast-paced market where they're more trend-conscious and incredibly digital-forward. So Western companies really need to respect these nuances and understand, the upside of these massive opportunities before, entering or expanding in the market.
Because we mentioned earlier on that there's a kind of this, should we say, bad habit of perhaps Western companies, and we see it in Europe. You see often American companies treat Europe as a homogenized mass. And so, answering my own question here, I guess it would be foolish to treat Asia, as one homogenized mass, because of course it's not. You've explained how just those two countries are very, very distinct. And also then you have China is a whole different beast in itself.
Indeed, yes. So that's still one of the biggest mistakes I see with companies coming into the APAC market, right? Treating it as one strategy, or worse, they feel their global strategy would resonate in the market and want to expect that global marketing strategy to land here. But the consequences of, a campaign failing is not just a campaign, not landing or losing the opportunity to get customers, but it's far beyond that. So, for example, you start with understanding the buyers. So in Japan, it's very sales, risk averse. So while bold, innovative messages from the US, coming here, you might feel it's strong, got value proposition in it, but Japanese would find that too risky or too salesy and not respond to that. At the same time, you can take a, appropriately modest kind of content from Europe or the UK for that matter, and launch that in South Korea. And that may not land because, South Korean, buyers, they expect clarity, they expect confidence. They want to see more innovation. They want to see differentiation. So if your tone is not right, you're automatically disengaging with your buyers. And then second, companies tend to choose wrong channels. I've seen companies in Japan pouring, money into LinkedIn, advertising on LinkedIn, where the platform is still relatively quite small and not the right platform, while ignoring, for example, trade media, industry associations, or even Facebook for that matter when it comes to B2B. And likewise in Korea, kind of neglecting local platforms like Naver and Kakao is a misguided approach. So YouTube also is very prominent in Korea. So you got to really invest in advertising on YouTube, where nearly 85% of the population are using streaming services. And beyond, channels and messaging, trust is critical. Small cultural missteps, especially in Japan, can signal a lack of commitment. And then once the trust slips, the sales cycle becomes almost impossible. Likewise, in Korea, trust and relationship also play a big role. Respecting culture generally shows that you're committed to the market. So when all of these combine, lack of messaging, wrong channels, cultural missteps, the companies start to lose momentum. And then typically what I've seen is budgets get pulled. HQ says, well, these markets are labeled as difficult to handle. So they lose confidence and then they start pulling budgets. When in reality, actually, Japan and Korea, two of the most sophisticated high-value B2B markets in the world. So when the approach is done right, true localization, true commitment, right partners, you start to get traction and you can stably grow the business sustainably. So that's the key.
So it's because I think I get a sense often companies have this perception of it, as you're saying, these are hard markets to get into, but actually you're saying they're not hard, but you just got to do the groundwork. You've just got to set yourself up right and understand the nuances and not just expect that what might work, but this you can just roll out campaigns that might have worked in other spheres and they're going to just land just as equally well in these markets. So I guess that's reassuring to the organizations. And we talked about the kind of the nature of kind of trust in the buying process and relationships. I mean, you're saying relationships are quite. You intimated earlier on that relationships are very important, and there's the traditional aspect of both these markets. That relationship, I guess, with all aspects of the supply chain is critical. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Yes, I think if you think back, the key cultural, similarities, but also differences between Japan and South Korea. They both share Confucian roots, right? They both based on trust, decision-making is very important. Hierarchy and respect, is key to Japanese society. So maintaining harmony, avoiding risks. They're a very, risk-averse country. So decisions, move very slowly. Every stakeholder needs to be consulted, especially senior leaders. Progress needs to be aligned. It's less about speed. It's more about sound, risk-free decision-making together, consensus building. Whereas Korea, although it's fast-moving business environment, hierarchy still exists. Who speaks first, who approves things, how you address people is all very important. Especially in B2B, where it's less dynamic, the hierarchy plays a very strong role. So buyers in Korea, compared to Japan, are open to innovation and more direct. And expect clear differentiation, but they still, respect culture, they respect hierarchy. So you need to show that you respect that as well while you're trying to win them over. And in South Korea, there's this pali or quickly mindset. Everything needs to move at a faster pace. So that's why it's a bit complicated. So when you think about it, okay, you're responding faster, but then you also need to respect structure and understand the decision-making process. So it's a little bit more complicated, whereas at least with Japan, you got to spend time building those relationships, building trust, laying the groundwork, and, showing that you're committed to the market, and then slowly start to, present your product, your offerings to the market.
I guess there's probably a bit of a tension in the minds of, or a kind of almost a contradiction or paradox in the minds of perhaps Western marketers or Western executives or organizations, is that you kind of conflate innovation, and you made a point earlier on that these are very innovative economies, innovative societies, invest a lot proportion of GDP in innovation, and yet despite that, they still have a very hierarchical and respect orientated and cautious, should we say, approach to decision making. That might be seen as a almost oxymoronic in kind of to some people, but that's the state they exist in, and so Westerners have got to get their heads around that to really embrace the opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's the confusion, right? So when you see that contradiction in the market, you don't know how to engage. So that's why it's really important to, if you're working with local partners or if you have a local team, take their advice, listen to them, because they know what the market's like, and they'll be able to guide you as to how to, communicate in the market, what messages would land. And we can talk a little bit more about channels and messaging and so on, but it's really understanding to start the business culture, because the business culture is foundation and doesn't change no matter who you are, no matter how big your company or brand is. You need to follow the business culture. You need to, respect the business culture. Doesn't matter who you are. Once you do that, then you will actually, earn trust quickly in the market and build momentum. And we've seen so many global, blue chip brands in Japan doing very well. Same in South Korea. They've really learned to enter the right way with respecting culture, respecting hierarchy, and making sure that whatever they do in the market follows the norms of the market.
So we talked a lot there about the buyer behavior fundamentals and that nature of hierarchy. Let's talk a bit about, we also mentioned channel strategy earlier on. You talked about some of the channels that do work and some of the ones that don't work, and perhaps there might be unexpected ones or ones that perhaps upended. You talked about Facebook's quite popular and YouTube's quite popular, but LinkedIn is very, very early in its evolution there and its penetration there, I suppose. We talked about Japan's got its preference for stability and established relationships, so its career is more dynamic and trend driven. What does Japan's traditional business culture mean? Does that mean digital, particularly in Japan, plays a smaller role, or is it a bit more nuanced? Is it too hard to suggest that as a broad brush theme?
Sure. I mean, digital is important for Japan. Digitals are all about helping you to build trust, right? It's not going to help you to close a sale. It's about being seen. So digital in Japan, Yahoo Japan still matters. They are owned by SoftBank, one of the big telecom companies in the market. So with digital channels, you can leverage digital channels for building trust, so sharing content, white papers, case studies, doing webinars, doing seminars online, using email for nurture. It's more about building trust and relationship to the next step, and the next step is the face-to-face. Decisions are made in person. You've got to meet your prospective buyers. You've got to build those relationships with them face-to-face, and show that you're committed to the market before you're able to win a deal. Whereas in Korea, it's fully digital first. Naver dominates search. Google is used for high intent opportunities. And Kakao, which is Kakao Talk Messenger, dominates the market. Their service is universal in the country. YouTube is very prominent. Naver blogs are very important for B2B marketing. Even Instagram and PPC campaigns are essential, but really depends on, whether your buyers are on that channel and whether you can leverage those channels. So, for Japan, digital is an introduction, is the way to build that initial trust before shifting to in-person engagement. Whereas South Korea is the engine for the entire buyer journey that happens on digital. And then from that, you can, move quicker into your buying cycle.
Okay, that's really fascinating. So very, very different dynamics in that respect. Ironically, I think actually the UK probably seems to much be, or UK certainly, I don't know, I can't speak for USA so much, but UK, there's the amount of events that are happening in the UK. I think we're almost reversing into a place that Japan exists in terms of that digital being, there's so much content out there, then actually you need that physical event to kind of cement that trust and to kind of have a relationship and meet the person you'll be buying from. But yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, and if I can also add, in Japan, trade events are huge. Every industry, there's so many trade events. A lot of our clients, we take them to trade events because that's really a way to meet with potential buyers, be seen in the right platforms. Trade events are often organized by trade associations. That shows you're highly engaged with trade associations. You start to show up on the trade association websites. Your brand shows up as an exhibitor. You get speaking opportunities, at trade events. So we have a lot of clients that we try to get them speaking opportunities at trade events so that they can, engage with their potential buyers. Media shows up there. Trade media shows up at trade events, often are constantly covering it. So that's that face-to-face touch. Like there's so many trade events happening every single week in Japan. So you got to be at your industry's trade events and the trade associations. Same in Korea as well. Trade events are quite popular.
It speaks to the hierarchical nature of society and the kind of the rigor that has to be applied in that environment. So it's fascinating. I'm a big buyer of. Very believe in the face-to-face event events and the power of that. I'm glad we seem to be going back to that. But Japan clearly, and Korea, to a different extent, have never lost that sense. So we talked about buyers. We talked about channels. How about content and messages? Beyond channel selection, how did content approach expectations differ? We know in Western markets that long-form thought leadership resonates with B2B buyers. Does the same apply in Japan or Korea, or are there different format and messaging nuances the companies need to consider?
I think, long-form content, thought leadership content needs to be adapted for the market, really depending on, what's the message you're providing to the market. So in Japan, for example, your long form thought leadership content should be more detail oriented, should be more formal, it should have proof driven facts in it, and should also support any risks that your technology or services is going to mitigate for your end buyer and user. Whereas in South Korea, being a more digital fast but also visual country, you need to rework your content into more visual, more fast-moving formats, such as highlighting innovation, highlighting speed. If you've got infographics that can make that message land, you want to align that content to your local market expectations. So yeah, in Japan, because again buyers are risk averse, content needs to be very detailed, very formal, very data driven. And Japanese audiences prefer heavy text, a lot of text materials. Quite often we get requests from, buyers get requests from their potential vendors as to, okay, provide me sales materials, and that basically means, detailed sales packs about the product, about the technology, finer aspects as to how it works, backed up with in-depth case studies. That is what your buyers want. And the tone should be very polite, should be understated. Don't oversell it. Don't make bold statements. Provide facts, provide proof. That's very important in Japan. And conversely, in South Korea, buyers are highly digital and trend aware, so they expect your content's visual, very dynamic, quickly digestible. There's a lot of usage of video content, demonstrations through show reels, showcasing innovation and competitive advantage is important. And so thought leadership should be valued, based on the market you're trying to reach. And the tone in Japan is more direct, and more responsiveness is important. Whereas in South Korea, you can provide that direct content messaging, but it's about being responsive. In South Korea, you got to be very responsive. Any slow replies can damage trust because, again, that very pali fast nature. They want you to respond to their request for information quickly as well. Yeah,
that's fascinating. And one of the things that is a trend that we're seeing increasingly in the UK and I guess and in UK, Western Europe, and North America is the kind of consumerization of content. So you're increasingly getting content that looks, feels, sounds, and acts like the kind of content you might consume in your consumer lives. What I'm taking from what you said there is that in South Korea, perhaps that's more the case, whereas in Japan, they actually want the more formal, old-fashioned, we might say, B2B. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So we're not consumerizing in Japan, but we are consumerizing in South Korea.
In South Korea, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay. We talked about tone and content messaging, PR and earned media is another issue. You've got a background in publishing. And I'm guessing probably that hierarchical nature, particularly in Japan, means that going through recognized, respected channels is a very big deal. Would that be a good assumption?
Very crucial. So Japan has this, press club or kisha kurabu structure. It's very, highly localized, relationship-driven PR, right? So press clubs are associations for journalists from specific, beats, whether it's technology, finance, government, ministries, and they control access to information and the key journalists. So foreign companies typically cannot access these clubs directly, so they typically must work with a local PR agency to navigate the system. And journalists, they are very much focused on facts. They not opinion-driven. Japanese journalists prioritize publishing, and reporting facts, official statements, official data. They generally don't publish opinion pieces, op-eds as we know it in the West. And, relationship building is critical. Building relationships with journalists are long-term investments. PR professionals, that's why they exist. They engage in informal social interactions, information sharing. That's more important than actually just trying to, get coverage. And becoming a trusted, kind of reliable source of information is key, critical. So when we recommend our clients, when they do reports and if they got data based on reports, whether they're global reports, and often with a local angle is very important, because that data is what the journalists are looking for. They can leverage the data, and then when there's more requests for data, you start to build a relationship, provide data to them on a regular basis. Eventually, when they do have a major piece they've been commissioned to write for the media they work with, then they call on you for interviews or quotes in their article. And whereas in South Korea, they also do have press clubs, and it's also quite hierarchical. But it's a little bit more easier to access journalists, and they quite often respond quickly. However, you still need to know that the press clubs exist and try to process through the press clubs and through specific media beat journalists. Journalists in South Korea, for example, they like speed and exclusiveness. They're very demanding, and they have this feeling that they are the superior person in the room. So journalists are considered, the superior person in the room and demand respect, and you need to show that. And for them, it's all being fast, being reactive is crucial, and they want scoops, right? They want something interesting, something newsworthy, and that's going to provide them a competitive advantage or a trend. And again, like I guess any good media, you need to build relationship, whether it's Japan, Korea, or anywhere else in the world. But you need to build that through face-to-face meetings on a regular basis.
I was laughing when you said that journalists want to be seen as the most superior person in the room. I've certainly, people accuse me of wanting to be that over the years. Whether it's true or not, I'll let you decide. Fascinating, really fascinating. Again, earlier on, you mentioned regulation and compliance. That's also obviously a big deal when you're entering new countries, and there are things that you could do in some markets that you can't do in others, and sometimes that can be really unexpected, and sometimes it can be crippling. And so, tell us what the environment looks like in these two territories, these two nations, and how does that? What restrictions might that put on Western companies trying to enter these markets?
Yeah, so I think both countries have very strict data privacy laws, strict advertising standards, strict PR messaging standards as well. Japan has the APPI, or the Act on Protection of Personal Information. And, you also need to be very clear in your marketing. You need to be explicit consent for collecting of data to use for marketing. You need informed consent from individuals before using their personal information for marketing purposes. And you need to establish opt-in mechanisms, that's highly recommended. It's all about transparency. Companies must be very clear and specify the purpose of collecting data and inform the users of any changes in the data. And, privacy policies should be accessible on websites. So if you visit our website, we have a privacy policy in Japanese, and also, policies against, working, how we work in the market. Advertising standards are, pretty strong as well here. There's an act against unjustifiable premiums and misleading representations. That's the core foundational regulation. Basically, what it does is it prohibits any misrepresentation by brands or companies, whether it's about quality or standard or price of goods and services. What's important is, for Western brands to avoid vague or boastful claims that might be seen as acceptable in the Western markets, for example, will definitely be considered misleading in Japan. And authorities can order those advertisers to cease advertising or take corrective measures, and also impose 3% surcharge on sales for any misrepresentations. So it's really important to follow those standards. And of course, stealth marketing. These days there's a lot of paid promotion, so you need to also clearly disclose that it's a paid promotion. There's a lot of content syndication happening in the market, which is great. And buyers want to see that. We're not trying to fool buyers, with trying to pass off as an editorial content when it's clearly advertorial content. But they want to see that and if you make those clear statements that this is advertising content and this is why we are providing it to you, you'll actually, earn the respect of the buyer. And in South Korea, it's kind of similar. South Korea has the Personal Information Protection Act. And again, that's kind of protecting, data of South Korean individuals and foreign companies, whether they have a physical presence in the country or not, must designate a domestic agent if their sales or their volume of personal information they're collecting exceeds a certain threshold, and it changes from industry to industry. And PIPA generally requires that the data subjects that companies are collecting information on needs to be consent driven. So you need to get approval from the users that you're providing the data and what are you using the data for. And if there's any breach in data, you should immediately notify the relevant authorities within 72 hours. That's really what is expected. And I guess similar to Japan, they also have Fair Labeling Advertising Act that prevents any unfair labeling and advertising that could be seen as deceitful or misleading consumers. So it really depends. And some industries are, for example, medical devices, that may be certain medical devices may be sold over the counter in other markets, cannot be sold in Korea due to the medical laws and advertising standards as well. So you really need to understand, what are the regulatory, nuances of your industry in the market in either country, and work with, professionals on the market on ground. Then you can, navigate it with ease.
Okay, there are lots of nuance to consider there. So talking about working on the ground with those companies that understand the market, we should talk about the agency world, because certainly in the UK and the USA, less so in Western Europe, but certainly the UK and USA has a thriving agency scene. There's lots of different providers, lots of different people competing, jostling for position. Whereas often we just spoke in the past, you described the agency landscape in Japan as being pretty different, dominated by the offshoots of major holding companies like Dentsu and Hakuhodo, which if I pronounced that correctly, I hope. How does this affect Western companies trying to find marketing agency partners, and what should they look for in an agency relationship in these markets?
Yeah, you're very right. In Japan, the agency landscape is pretty much dominated by the massive holding companies, Dentsu, Hakuhodo, ADK. They pretty much, dominate the market here. And they have complex cross-shareholding kind of setups. It's called keiretsu in Japanese, which basically is kind of a loosely combined, interconnected companies that kind of work and have relationships with each other, but they have also cross shareholdings. So that's kind of a way to protect their ecosystem, And so what happens is, these large advertising and marketing companies, they have access and influence, right, in the market. So if you need to get access to, for example, primetime television, right, you need to work with these companies to get access to primetime media. And a lot of these agencies have deep-rooted relationships with major media outlets, with major companies, the press clubs. So they're you see them as powerful gatekeepers. But on the flip side, because they're so large and so, hierarchical and structured, they can be pretty slow-moving, pretty bureaucratic, and might kind of clash with the culture of, let's say, or the agility of Western companies trying to enter the market that want things happening faster. So typically, they're also very they offer a wide range of services under one roof, kind of integrated models, but the consistency might lack because although it might be offered by the holding company, the parent company, the work itself might be kind of them subcontracted to one of their, companies in the shareholding group. So there's communications may not be fluid, and so on. So in South Korea, for that matter, it's kind of similar. There's the local chaebol, the big companies, the Samsungs and Hyundais. So they are kind of global holding companies, have strong ties, with the agency ecosystems as well. And these, large conglomerates, they work with large domestic agencies and are tied into that kind of network of business relationships. So for outsiders, it might be really hard to navigate or penetrate. And again, because the South Korean market is very dynamic, it's fast-paced, agencies tend to be more responsive and also digitally native compared to, for example, Japanese agencies. But, aligning with Western expectations is very important. So I think, digital agencies in South Korea, that can leverage local platforms, Naver, Kakao, and implement, highly visual dynamic campaigns are what you should be looking for. Whereas in Japan, you want agencies that are, got good bilingual capability, got good understanding of the cultural nuance, are independent so that they can understand, international business, but also provide, for the intricacies of Japanese business and corporate culture is what you want to see. And for both markets, like when you're selecting an agency, you always ask for track record and see for similar B2B clients that they've worked with, not just, global, but also if they're working with local companies, because that can establish trust and confidence in their ability to service local companies in the domestic market. So that's kind of what I would suggest to look for. Yeah.
Okay. There's lots of really useful advice in there. So thank you for that. Just drawing to a close now. There's hopefully there are going to be lots of companies listening to this who are Western European, Western North American, Western Europe, thinking about Japan and Korea for the first time. What are the essential steps would you advise to them in terms of getting their go-to-market strategy right? What activities or investments should they prioritize, and which are the ones that can wait?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what they're looking for. So, for example, with Japan, first it's important to secure a local partnership. It's a really crucial step because a local partnership with a distributor, a reseller, or a strategic partner can provide instant access to the market, but also can provide credibility, and the local partner can give you guidance on the cultural and or the regulatory complexities of operating in the market. It's very important. This is what we emphasize to all our clients: the importance of doing deep in-market research to really understand the local industry trends, the competitors, your buyers' preferences, and then based on that to build your value proposition and messaging in the local language, not just translating, but writing it from ground up in Japanese. Avoiding, just, claims that might land in a Western context to really make sure that the messaging resonates with the local market. It's difficult when you're getting started to have, local case studies because you don't have customers, but think about case studies that are going to be relevant to your audience, and be selective in picking the right case studies that you're going to localize, even if they're Western, case studies that's going to relate to the local audience. And it's important to, establish a legal presence, set up a legal entity, whether it's a branch office or a subsidiary, because that's a sign of commitment. And commitment is so important to gain trust in the market. So that's what I would prioritize for, first steps for entering Japan. Of course, you need everything in Japanese. Your website needs to be in Japanese. All the content needs to be in Japanese. Even if it's a few page, website, it shows that you're committed to the market. And then based on that, you can later, do campaigns, whether it's PR or advertising campaigns. On the flip side, if you look at South Korea, you got to have offline and online, credibility and speed because of just, how the market operates. So having a presence on Naver, you can start a Naver blog that you can talk about your business, investing in Kakao Talk as a business channel for communicating with your clients, creating content that's visually rich. Similarly, establishing local partnerships through local resellers would be a good first moving advice. And then, when possible, participate at networking events and trade events to build those relationships.
Okay, that sounds great. Really, really great advice. So just kind of a last question from me. So we discussed the fact you've been or custom media. You've been in Japan for a very long time, and you're moving into Korea early next year. What's driving that decision, and what trends do you see shaping B2B marketing in both Japan and Korea over the next few years that perhaps Western marketers should perhaps be looking out for in terms of informing their ongoing strategy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, although we've, a Japan company, Japanese-based, and started in Japan, we always get inquiries from our clients saying, can you help us in Korea? Do you do Korea? What's working in Japan should work in Korea, right? You should be able to do Korea. So, over the years, we've always had these requests, and in the past, we would have turned them down. But as the request of starting to gain more momentum, we realized that we need to be servicing in the Korean market. And that's why we started a couple of years ago helping a few clients in the South Korean market. And as the demand is starting to increase, it just makes sense for us to have a presence on ground. And that's why we are moving and actually opening an office in South Korea early next year. The trends that, are shaping both these markets, well, of course, you can't ignore the AI and automation trend. But in terms of marketing specifically, I think, hyper-personalization and predictive analytics and marketing automation is a huge trend, and AI is being used to, analyze, these vast data sets to help to target better. And we're seeing this even in traditional Japan, because you can then really understand your buyers better. So you can create the messages that your buyers want to see, and you can build that trust and relationship by really understanding your buyers better. And video content will continue to dominate in both markets. Especially shorter, engaging customer testimonial videos, product demos we're seeing being very popular, in South Korea. And ABM is a bit of a challenge to launch ABM in Japan, because typically, unlike in the West, somebody would have a very clear role defined. They are the head of so and so, or their business card would say what they do. But you take a Japanese business card, you would just say, the person's name and the department they are in. So what do they do in that department? So it's really challenging to understand the role of the person in the department and how many layers deep are they. So it gets a little bit more tricky to launch ABM campaigns. And that's why you really need to spend time with, understanding your buyers and creating content specifically for your buyers. Yeah. And finally, sustainability, social responsibility are key messages in B2B. And that kind of really dominates the content cycles here.
Fantastic. Robert, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. It's like, I love complexity in B2B, and that adds layers of complexity in terms of working outside perhaps areas that I have been involved in observing marketing campaigns. So really fascinating. Cultural nuances are so interesting. And I guess the message I'm taking away from this is these are huge opportunities, both these markets, but they've got to do them right. There aren't any shortcuts. You've got to understand the nuances of what's going on in each market. And if you make assumptions that things are the same, then you're probably going to end up slowing your progress down, and probably wasting some marketing budget as well. No one wants to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's not the right thing to do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Robert, thanks so much for your time today. Really enjoyed this. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Robert as well. If you've enjoyed today, we'd love you if you could rate this episode or the podcast, and either of you would really value your thoughts and your contributions. There is plenty more great content like this all around the issues of trust in B2B marketing. And so I hope you get to dig into that if you haven't done so already. But for me, for now, and for Robert, thanks very much for joining us, and hope you have a good day. Thank you.